Welcome to the Funnel Reboot Podcast, brought to you by Marketing What's New. Let's get into today's show.
Hey, Glenn here. Welcome to Funnel Reboot. Today, we're going to talk about data-activated marketing. First, I have to remind you, if you're listening to this in early 2023, please make sure that you take action to get Google Analytics 4 going in your organization. We're continuing our series on advancing analytics. So today we're going to talk about automated marketing data pipelines for reporting and activation. Look, if that last sentence didn't make total sense to you, don't worry. Our guest is going to tell us what it is, why we need it, and how we can set out implementing it. The place where our guest got his start was rather unique. It was on the island of Nantucket. It's about 20 kilometers, 15 miles long, which is small enough that most visitors who come from Massachusetts leave their cars on the mainland and come across on the ferry and rent a bike to get around. Our guest's journey started with a job at one of the island's bike rental shops. Over the next decade, as he rose to become the company's GM, he became convinced of the power of SEO for driving that bike shop's traffic. He relocated to Colorado. At various points, he worked in corporate SEO roles and worked out on his own. He even mashed up skills from his past to serve businesses in the pedal-powered rental market, calling it Bike Shop SEO. In the past 4 or 5 years, he's built cutting-edge SEO tools using cloud technology, and he shared how to deploy them, speaking at places like MozCon, SearchLove, and Local U, and in the agencyautomators.com community, which he co-founded. He's just taken on a new role that has tool building baked right into his mandate as Director of Innovation for Sterling Sky. When not at work, he loves doing typical Colorado things like fly fishing and skiing, along with family-friendly activities like hiking and camping, where their 2 dogs can tag along. Join me for a really cool talk with Noah Lerner. Noah Lerner, thanks for coming on. Good to see you, man.
It's great to spend time with you, Glenn. We've had a couple chats already, so this is great.
Yeah, and they've been thoroughly enjoyable, and they are definitely, for some people that'll be listening to this, going to be next level. But I want people to understand the kinds of things that you have been able to do with the right data and the right tools for activating that data. Why don't you start by telling me, take me back about a year and a half, 2.5 years ago. Tell me what new tools you opened up under the Christmas tree and got yourself into with all the organic data that you have been playing around with.
Great question, Glenn. I want to just cover the past 2 years because it's been like a real area of innovation and discovery. So 2 years ago, I was working with a lot of bike shop clients, and it was the beginning of the pandemic. And the first thing that we knew was that the pandemic would have a huge impact on their performance one way or another. We weren't sure if it was going to be a situation where they'd have major loss or major growth. One thing that we knew for sure was that we wanted to capture that data to give us kind of a baseline to come back to post-pandemic. And in 2023, we're kind of coming out of it now, right? Like things are becoming more normal and different. I know, right? More normal in different ways. But what we found was that back then we knew that we wanted to store the data. And the only place that made sense to me was to store it in a technology that Google Cloud Platform provides called Google BigQuery. And so I knew that I wanted to learn the technologies that were necessary to be able to get my clients' data stored there so that later on I'd be able to learn the technologies to be able to query it or ask questions of the data. And so I learned a bunch of different strategies and technologies to be able to do that. And I started really simple by uploading CSVs of data up to BigQuery, which then turned into Google App Script, learning sort of like their kind of proprietary version of JavaScript to push data up to BigQuery. And then I learned other technologies like Node.js, which is a much more robust technology for pushing data up. And the outcome of that was learning a ton of different skills that even turned into a product, which enables marketers to go very, very deep into Google Search Console data, which if they're not used to looking at Google Search Console data, it gives a huge amount of insight into consumer intent. It's more than just search. It allows people to see how people think about, talk about, search for products, services, brands, etc. Is that helpful?
Yeah, there's a lot of tools there, and even programming languages. So
a lot of blah blah.
This is part of the new reality. I think that we're going to notice here is that as our friends over in IT have known for a long time, there's more than one way to do anything, and what is starting to happen in marketing is that you've got people like you that are hatching ways of getting data piped and then analyzed, but no two people may do it the same. And we have now kind of collided, as it were, with the IT world because, and I'm wondering if you can help me here, but I think Google Cloud is one of those ways that it's one of those tools where, because it's built by IT people, it offers you many ways of doing the same thing. So I guess my question is, did the way that you just described with those individual pieces, is that the only way to get data into Google Cloud?
No.
Or did you just happen to find one of them and there's a whole bunch of other ways?
So tons of ways. Like there's a lot of services. The most prominent is probably Fivetran. It's
right.
robust.
So these are ETL providers, right?
Correct. Yeah. So Fivetran's one. Supermetrics is another. Stitch Data is another. And the more I did the research, the more I came to feel that the sort of options that were available on the market were really expensive. And we're going to be outside the kind of budgets that our agency could afford. And it was just plain exciting to me to kind of learn the technology. So, and there's different languages. Like a lot of people like to work with one called Python. And for people doing data science or people looking at marketing data, a lot of times Python is the foundational technology for that. And a lot of the documentation inside Google for doing data pipelining starts with Python. So that probably is a more commonsensical way to start if you don't have any kind of coding knowledge. But for me, I had a lot of JavaScript background, so it made sense to stick with Node.js. And I'm also pretty cheap by nature. And so I wanted to build applications in a way that would be as budget friendly as possible. And that led me down a road to learn how to build what are called serverless applications. And those are really cool because you only pay for them when they're running. You don't have to pay for them. You don't have to pay for a server or a server instance. It's like when an event triggers something to run, that's the only time that you pay for it. And so like being really budget friendly with how I built that technology with something called Cloud Functions inside Google Cloud Platform, in combination with being really budget conscious with how we store the data in Google BigQuery and how we query the data, meant that we could really we could run very powerful applications in a really budget friendly way. Like our product has a hosting cost and querying cost of less than $100 per month, and it powers hundreds of subscribers.
Right.
And that's because of what we built.
Yeah. And right here is a mind shift. And I think a lot of people who have only been working, let's say, on their local computer when they've been trying to do analytics, this is a bit foreign to them, but let me see if I got it right. If I'm just running something locally on my computer, or even, let's say, Google Sheets, I will notice as I throw thousands and tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of more rows of data, that it'll get slower and slower and slower. So
Sure.
I may think of it as free, but what's actually happening is that I'm exceeding what that tool can do, but I'm also seeing that that tool was only given so many processing cycles to do its job, and I'm suffering by just, having to go get a coffee or, leave it overnight. In a serverless environment, there's no problem with cycles. We've got more cycles than we could ever use. But the pacing item is now not time, it's money, right? I'm on a meter, and I have to be judicious about what I build and how it uses the data, how much it's going to hit that data to give me back what I want. Have I got that right?
Yeah. So yes. So the beauty of serverless is you only pay for it when it runs, and also it has the ability to horizontally scale, which means that I can have one process, one piece of software that multiplies itself out to n quantities of those items, and each one of those can do stuff at the same time. And then what you find is that you're only running as slow as you need to in order to stay inside of what are called API rate limits. And for the stuff that I was building, I had three key rate limits that were controlling how fast my application could run. The first is Google Search Console's API rate limit of 20 requests per second. That's as fast as I can make requests to them. BigQuery had rate limits too, depending on the type of reads or writes that you were doing with BigQuery. So as I'm building the application out and it's horizontally scaling, I have to make sure that there's only so many instances that could run at a time and as fast as the rate limits for those APIs would let me run. And with BigQuery, just for example, you were talking about like accessing more data. Like when you're dealing with Google Sheets, you can have 5 million cells in a sheet, which is a lot, right? But if you have 50,000 rows that have 100 columns, all of a sudden you're beyond that. And when we're looking at Google Search Console data just as one data source, and for your folks, they're probably dealing with the GA4 bulk transfer service and tons of columns in that data. We're talking about millions of rows, not millions of cells. We're talking about millions of rows and gigabytes of data. And when you make a query that accesses a lot of data at a time in Google BigQuery, what will happen is that their query engine will horizontally scale in order to be able to query through gigabytes, terabytes, or petabytes in seconds, which is amazing when you think about it. So that's kind of the power of that serverless platform, is the ability to have units of work happen in a scaling environment. And they handle retries. Like when you build things, they always break. And so you have to build them in ways to handle those things that are breaking. And serverless makes it really awesome or easy to manage that when you combine your cloud functions, which are like a type of serverless application, with something else called a task queue. And the task queue allows you to throw thousands or hundreds of thousands of units of work into a queue, and then they get pushed to a cloud function to run. And when they break, they go back in the queue, which is really useful.
Right. Yes.
None of that is going to be relevant for your audience, but it's just such a
for any who are sitting in an agency and who are thinking, okay, I want to do this once, get this dashboard going once, and then I've got other clients that need this. Yes, or if you're working on a company and your own company has different lines of business and you want to break it down that way, you may run into some of these things. The kind of the thought that comes to my mind as you're doing this is, you can and you should do it. I mean, the fact that we can horizontally scale and just get gobs of data is good, but we also, even just with our business hats, our marketing hats on, we have to be asking, do I need all the data? Like, do I really, what would I do differently if I had an answer that came out of this? Do I really have to have all the data to tell me that? Most of the time, the answer is no, correct?
Correct. Yeah. I agree with you 100%. And I'm not sure how many of your audiences are following what's happening with Google Search Console, but they released a brand new service yesterday that I had been beta testing for about a year. And it's called the bulk data export, which is really probably the biggest news in Google Search Console in years. And a lot of SEOs are going to be really excited about it. And the reason why is that, I was talking about units of work, like to get what's available in the bulk data export, they're providing all 6 search types, all countries, all 218 countries, and all 3 devices worth of data. And to backfill a year and 16 months worth of that data using just API calls, you'd have to make 1.3 million API calls for a pretty large site. And to put that in perspective, like because of those rate limits that I told you about before with 20 requests per second, it would take you somewhere between 72 and 85 hours of straight API calls just to backfill all that data. So you get into a place where you have a huge amount of data available, and it's no longer, can I get the data? It's finding meaning in it, which is the key skill and the key thing that you and I find interesting and why we have roles. And I think that the most important thing for me when I look at data is to understand that there is no absolute truth and everything's directional based on how sampling works in different platforms. And the key thing for me when I think about information or data is how can I find enough of a narrative or tell enough of a story that justifies budget? And when I say justifies budget, it justifies marketing expense in order to accomplish some kind of business goal. And that's really key. It's not, do I know everything? It's, do I know enough to make a decision to spend money on something that I hope will have some kind of return on my investment? And
sure,
I think that's the key, my key takeaway.
That's true north. Yeah.
Anything.
I mean, you're totally right. I'm smirking because the fact that people, even in a smaller company, are now through things like the bulk data export or, bringing in their Google ads or bringing in what's happening inside of other systems that they touch data on. If they think to themselves, I'm not a user of big data, guess what? I mean, the big world, the world of big data just came to you. You are in the world of big data. You cannot not be. So what are you going to do about it? And I love how you talked about a couple of different scopes there, but let's imagine one that is true across all data sets, which is time. Okay, so we can use time bounds, weekly, daily, hourly. I like how you said no data is absolutely perfect. I would maybe in a time way say there's no such thing as real time, right? Everything is happening, whether it was a millisecond ago or yesterday, right? There isn't real time. There's what data we have that just made its way here. Maybe you can tell me a little bit about like what the nuances of grabbing data at different times means. I'm thinking of, in a previous conversation, you were showing me some things where data is like moving along, almost like train boxcars getting from, their source to their destination. And you had to make it so that not too many of them arrived at once, or else the process that was going to run and, churn through that data would either be glutted or it would be, occupied on other things. So like, how do we make sure that the data shows up when it needs to, that we, because it's so large, that we make it small enough that it's like manageable pieces for the process. Tell me what some of your tricks are around that.
I think for your audience, honestly, they're probably going to be best served trying to solve that problem with a off-the-shelf service, right? Like I was trying to build something that competes with off-the-shelf services, so I had to solve all the same problems that they have to solve. But I think sort of solving for that by paying someone else to solve it will save people hundreds of hours of time better spent driving revenue. Like, to be
that's good point. But I think what has to happen when people are doing that is they've got to temper their expectations.
Yeah.
I'll give a simple example. Even setting up Google Analytics to go to BigQuery, you're given a choice. Would you like a daily update, or would you like a daily update and streaming?
Right.
And, I can imagine many people are drooling at the thought, I could have, next to real-time information. I imagine Noah would like to be sitting, over their shoulder at that point and saying, don't. You're fine with yesterday's data. That's okay.
Yeah. And there's a lot of reasons. The first is that budget. Because a load job, the daily is what's called a load job. And loads are free in BigQuery.
Right.
And streaming, you pay for every single row. And I don't want to pay for that. I mean, that's just me, but, I'm pretty comfortable not having real time for analytics stuff.
You'd need a very weird edge case to justify paying for it, right?
Yeah, if you had an e-commerce platform where you were running your Black Friday sale and you needed real-time data, that makes sense, I guess, for Black Friday. And really, there's 1 to 3 days a year where that would be relevant, even for the largest of the large. And but for most people, I think the daily load makes a ton of sense. But when you were asking the question up front, like if I was to take it on more directly, I would say that really you're limited by API rate limits. And you have to just kind of make sure that when you're feeding data from one point to the next and making requests from APIs, they're either specific or they're not about how much data you're allowed to grab per second, per minute, per hour, per day. And you just have to make sure that you stay inside those limits. And that if you do get specific errors when you request data too quickly, that you stop requesting and do something called a back off, where you say, whoa, I'm going to hold my horses for X period of time, whether it's a minute, 5 minutes, 15 minutes, an hour, a day, whatever it is. But my solution for that is always ask slower than whatever the rate limit is. So if it's 20 per second, I'm asking for 15.
Yeah. And this is a point where people are probably going to go and want to talk to someone who's familiar with the different technical options. But I know, for example, in Google Cloud, you've got different things like pub, sub. You have functions that some of them are built on the premise, I'm going to ping the destination, and until I hear an acknowledgement back, I'm just going to keep shoving it their way. But there's other options where it's, nope, this is like, standing on a train station waiting for the scheduled train to show up, and I'm going to, the data is going to ride along on that train. We have to remember that data, just like people moving someplace, we accept constraints all over the place. We don't notice things like if I'm trying to drive across town that probably half the time I'm going to hit red lights and I'm just going to sit there for a bit. But that's okay, because overall the grid works, right?
Yep.
For that very reason. We just have to kind of allow, we have to keep our enthusiasm in check and still, marvel when the data does get there, it's still way better than whatever we were using before.
100%. And that was a key driver for me to want to learn how to do all of this. Specifically, like I had been working with Google Data Studio, which has become Google Looker Studio in the past couple months. And they have native connectors for Google Analytics, for Google Search Console, for Google Ads, for all kinds of Google products. But for me, I wanted tooling that worked at the speed of insight. And what that means is if I'm trying to go down a road of analysis, I want the tool to be working as fast as I'm coming up with ideas. And so with the native connectors, I would have an insight and then want to explore something further. And I'd click some filters on a dashboard, and 10 to 15 seconds later, the data would update. And then that would give me something else to think about. And then I'd have another 10 to 15 seconds waiting, or 5 seconds or whatever. And then if it was a dead end, I'd have to back up, wait another 10 to 15 seconds. That to me is not conducive to doing our best work. To me, what should happen is you apply a filter, a second, maybe two later, bam, the data is fresh. You can keep going down your road for analysis. 1 to 2 seconds waiting, 1 to 2 seconds, 1 to 2 seconds. You need to come back up for air, go back down deeper. And the reason why that 1 to 2 seconds is really, really amazing is, again, we're not dealing with those tens or hundreds or thousands of rows. We're dealing with millions of rows of data. So to be able to go through a massive haystack to get down to our needle quickly and efficiently and in any way we want in terms of being able to slice the data based on the different dimensions or metrics, to me is like a crazy powerful value proposition that you get when you're combining Google BigQuery with Google Looker Studio. And that's what I was motivated to build. Does that make sense?
It does, and I have to almost put the fine print underneath what you just said. Professional driver on a closed course. Please do not attempt to replicate this on your own. Because Noah, what's behind what you're saying is there was thought put into the structure of the data so that it could be culled in that way. And that it could, get those answers back 15 seconds or 2 seconds or 1 second response time. I would encourage marketers listening, go talk to a friend in IT or a database administrator or an outside firm that can give you advice on this because it takes all of that to pull off what Noah's just described. I want to talk a little bit about that analysis and other ways that we can activate that data. But before we do that, we're going to take a really quick break. I'm taking a moment to echo what I've been saying on social. And those of you who follow me there know that I've been talking about how you're managing in the world of GA4. To me, the new Google Analytics is more than just an interface. Its capabilities open up our entire funnel for analytical insights and for activating our marketing data. Now, most of you have installed GA4. That's great. To do this takes a bit more effort than that because you must configure GA4 with Google Cloud components, takes BigQuery, Looker Studio, services that API data back and forth, etc. And that's why I'm holding GA Fast Forward in-person events to do this over 2 days with people. A small group of us work together to implement this new stack using our own company's marketing data. We come away with ready-made dashboards and AI-built audiences that we can leverage in our Google Ads. These workshops are running in Eastern Canada and across New York State, and soon in Pennsylvania and Massachusetts too. You can go now and see all the details by going to gafastforward.com, either with the number 4 in fast forward or all spelled out. Let's get back to the show. Okay, Noah, so you've told us how we can pull that data into a visualization tool. We can let our mind run wild with the questions that we have, and then we can start drilling in to things like that. What to you does, nirvana look like? What are some of the really good applications that you wish more marketers could get out of their data, and some of the ones that you've had, a fun time putting together?
Fantastic question. I'm going to reframe it a little bit because I think folks will get more value out of this. Can I share my framework for analysis? Because I think that is crazy powerful over juicy bits, and I'll share juicy bits too. But like, I think having a framework is where it's at. And for me, the framework comes from my time working at 2 Octobers and in collaboration and discussions with people like Nico Brooks and Chris Skavish, the two founders of the company. So for us, the way that we do analysis is really, really cool. You have to approach any type of tool for analysis with questions in mind ahead of time. And so you need to define the problem. Anytime you're doing analysis or solving problems, you have to clearly define the problem that you're trying to solve. And after you've clearly defined the problem, then you can think about what dimensions, those are the things that have names that we can split our data up by, or the metrics, which are the things that we're counting in our data. What dimensions or metrics will help me answer that question? And then using either a data visualization tool like Looker Studio or some kind of native tool for analysis that comes with a data source like Google Analytics or Google Search Console or Google Ads, you open that tool up and you drill down into those dimensions or metrics to gain insights. And oftentimes I'll keep a Google sheet or a pen and paper and I'll write down insights as I go. And then after I've gleaned insights, I will try and coalesce them together into some more insights that will lead to, and this is the key part, hypotheses for things to test on my business, whether it's new pieces of content to build or new ways of building links from pages together or new landing pages or whatever. The key thing with analysis is it's not about just looking at stuff on pages or websites or whatever. It's about figuring out what to do next. What can we test next? Where should I invest my budget next? And then creating those tests that test that hypothesis, and then you track the outcomes of those tests in a time-based way. And then after you run your test, you glean insights from the performance of how it went, and you rinse and repeat that whole process over and over and as fast as you can. And the cadence of that cycling is what's going to determine ROI growth with speed. And so,
yeah, some of the biggest internet companies on the planet got there by doing just that.
Yeah. And I think the key thing is not expecting to walk up to a tool and to have it just magically tell me what to do next, but to approach it with specific questions or problems that we need to solve for, and understanding where in our data we could find the answers to that. In what I do in SEO, a lot of times it's starting wide, zooming in, creating insights, finding things to fix or test, and then rinsing and repeating that whole process on a weekly cadence, monthly cadence, quarterly cadence, depending on what the task is. And so understanding what the problem is in SEO can be things like, how do I get more clicks to this page type, to this page template, to this section of my website? Understanding, and for me, that's also tied to another framework, which I think is really key for a lot of marketers to wrap their minds around, and to potentially consider this as a very simple North Star, which is I use a framework that people jokingly call the learner revenue model, because that's my last name. But I didn't come up with this, but people call it that. Revenue equals traffic times conversion rate, or the percentage of people who decide to say yes, times average order or conversion value. And so my North Stars are making all three of those things bigger.
Right.
Whether it's
That's it.
more people coming in my store or online, more of them to buy helmets off the shelf or online, better conversion rate, and then higher order value oftentimes means marketing the things that have the biggest dollar item value and getting people to buy more of those or bigger packages or whatever. And so oftentimes when I'm trying to problem solve, it's around making one of those three things bigger, three different core types of problems. I'm trying to figure out how to get more people to sign up. Maybe I'm adding free shipping around the add to cart button or other conversion rate after CRO kind of techniques. Maybe I'm trying to get more traffic and I'm thinking multi-channel. Like, am I only solving this with SEO, or does it make sense to incorporate paid here to get people to go where the money is? And oftentimes where the money is closest to the bottom of the funnel. The money page in a B2B thing is the place where people are filling out the form. How do I get more people to my form page? In an e-commerce page, in an e-commerce site, it's how do I get more people to go to my product detail content? And that is oftentimes like a weird thing, because getting my product detail pages to rank means getting my collection pages to rank. And getting my collection pages to rank often means building top of the funnel content, which is brand guide content, category guide content, how-to content around anything having to do with that collection. And so it's sort of circuitous to focus over here with the top of the funnel, but that's what's necessary to get my bottom of the funnel to rank.
Right.
And so you're
right. It makes, that algebraic equation work. Yeah.
Yeah. And so you think about the problem. How do I get my bottom of the funnel content to rank? What do I need to do? And then that shows me what directory of my website to look at, to focus on, and what pages inside that directory to focus on, and which queries and query modifiers will help me get traffic to those sections of my website. More traffic to that section of the website equals more revenue. So that's kind of how I approach the analysis thing. And that's how that framework or a couple of frameworks work together to help drive it. I think that's useful. Forget about all the engineering stuff. But like, I think for keeping it simple, like that'll make any organization money.
The engineering side of it has to be reckoned with. Yeah. And I think you just helped me, make a connection with what you were talking about in the earlier part of our chat, where you were talking about a serverless application. To me, when you say application, I start to think, oh, is that the product, or is that? No. If I got this right, you've got your funnel, you've got that kind of front end user experience that people are getting. In the meantime, to be able to do all of that measuring and optimizing that you just talked about, you need data on that whole run. And because you're going to be going through that framework and taking all that data as a whole and on a monthly, weekly, maybe daily basis, examining it, that's the application that you build. That's the thing where it's running through a series of workflows to be able to give you the intelligence that you need to go out and make a better funnel.
That makes a lot of sense. Getting it to work in an automated fashion like that is really hard. And the reason why is that when we were building what we built, we were building and our definition of application is a little bit different, actually, to be honest. Like, I thought about it as building an unopinionated tool that would allow marketers to slice and dice their search data any way they wanted, so that they could have it conform to how they do analysis, rather than having an opinionated, this is how you have to do it kind of way of thinking about it. And And the reason why we went down that road, well, there were a lot of reasons, but one of the reasons was we didn't want to tell people how they have to do an analysis. We wanted to provide a framework for how we approach it so that if they don't have a framework, they could at least start there, have something to start with. But for other people that had frameworks, we didn't want to kind of get in the way of that. And the other piece of it is that for every different type of business, they all have these unique funnels. And for us to kind of try and shoehorn their business into our version of how it should work didn't feel like they would get a lot of value out of that. So we chose not to. And it was difficult because people want the 10 best options to do A, B, or C, but I have felt like even though we're busy as marketers, the time spent going into the data with purpose will yield results, and that there's stuff that you only see by looking at patterns and patterns and patterns of things. Whether it's like for me, you asked for juicy bits. This is going to sound simplistic to you, but it's made our clients a lot of money, which was for sale. Adding a page title modifier of, think about your widget that you're selling, widgets for sale, to reinforce a transactional query to make it easier for Google to understand that it's transactional and you're trying to sell something. If you have collections of products and you add for sale as a page title suffix, what we found was massive traffic growth and massive revenue growth because of that. And
right. And you gotta do a lot of things before you unearth that tends to work for, a number of clients. But I hear you loud and clear that each individual client, where they will probably find their own best version of that, is doing ad hoc analysis.
Yes.
There is no Noah or Glenn have the magic, 8-ball that you shake up and it's just going to say, do this.
Yep. 100%. And that expertise comes from talking to a lot of different people inside your organization. It's talking to the sales team, talking to the customer service team, looking at all your reviews, all of your email correspondences. You're going to see all kinds of patterns in the way that people talk about your business, both positively and negatively. Like I did n-gram analysis, which is where we break up strings of text into different length words. And the most prominent 3-word chunk that appeared in negative reviews for this one business was, they told me. So like you see how people talk about you when they're happy and when they're sad in ways that you don't actually know, even if you have an expert hat on because you've been doing something for decades. And I found that.
Yeah, you're so close to it. Sure.
Oh yeah. Like I found that after working in the bike space for over 20 years, that when I looked at the data row by row by row for hundreds of thousands of rows, I would see patterns that I didn't even think about in ways of marketing before.
Yeah. So we've got that intel that is great for humans.
Yeah.
When we've got this kind of data and it's all structured, are there applications for it where it can be fed into machines, maybe back into the CMSs or back into the ad platforms? Are there other ways to activate the data than just those aha moments that we as humans get?
Yeah, 100%. And I think this is something that's part of a service offering that you provide, right? Isn't this what you like to do? Yeah.
That's right.
100%.
And I guess we'll just leave it at, the phrase that I would sum it up with is machine learning.
Yeah.
They can learn just like we can. I have to take us into one or two things that you've opened my eyes to on. These are things that have been around a long time for IT folks, but for marketers, they may not have an association yet. And I want you to maybe explain, just if you can, at a very junior level, how these tools may be used to help pull off all of the regular data engineering and analyzing that you can do on the cloud. One of them is Git and GitHub. So can you kind of just give us the very basic 101 on that?
Great question. I don't know. I feel like that question, great question, but I feel like I don't know what subset of your audience is like crazy technical. Like for them to get value out of GitHub.
Well, when they're looking at things that say copy this code and paste it over there, right? Yeah. Hearing the word Git might just cause them to break out in hives. And, for a guy like you, that doesn't faze you because you understand what it's for. What is it for?
So GitHub is kind of like a global code repository for public and private code bases. And like I use it to store all the repositories of code that I build, and it allows you to even have version control. And so in a team environment, it's amazing because Nico could be working on one section of code. I can work on another section. We could both have different versions, and then you can different branches of the same tree, as it were. And then he could make a fix and push it, and then I could integrate that or merge it with my code and push that live into a production environment. And I was actually doing that right before our interview. So like that's how I use GitHub, and that's how it's amazing. You can integrate it with like your local code environment, and I use VS Code as my coding tool, and it's free. And there are all kinds of different plugins that enable you to do stuff, whether it's like syntax highlighting, whether it's using GitHub Copilot, which is amazing. That's an AI tool that enables you to just quickly accelerate your knowledge and also the speed with which you actually produce code.
Right. So if people hear these things, right, they're talking with that friend who's maybe setting this up for them, they at least know what it is. And here's the other one, and I promise the last one, DBT. Help people understand what, I referred to something earlier when I said that Google Cloud can deal with things in a number of different ways. So yes, there's an interface where you can click on stuff, but for those people who were hearing me then, maybe some of them heard that there's also even a terminal, like a shell that Google understands that you can drop stuff straight into. So I'll leave it there, but pick it up from there and tell us about DBT.
Okay, so when you're getting data from APIs, oftentimes there's a raw kind of nature to that data. And then there's how do I make this usable for my intended audience? And so typically you need to transform it from raw to final. And those transformations could be things like turning the word Florida into FL, or taking a date format that's in one date format and transforming it into another. And the data might come in on a daily cadence, and you might need to transform it on a daily cadence from input raw to output finalized and useful for whatever data visualization.
That's ready for rows and columns in a database.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so DBT has become kind of the de facto transformational transform tool. And when I was learning how to go from raw to final, I used DBT extensively. And they have two versions of the tool. One is you can use it locally on your machine, where you're installing it like a Git package or something. And then the other version is in their own cloud tool, which is what I leveraged. And what's neat about that is you can have a trigger where you post data to a webhook, and then DBT's like, yes, I will consume that data and transform it and make it useful. You can also have it run on like a cron job at a specific point in time every day. And that's how I used it. And that's what DBT does. And if I was watching companies to see when they go public and how much they're valued at, I think DBT would be an amazing company to keep my eyes on. And they've gone from a small analytics outfit called Fishtown Analytics into a company that's going to be worth a number of billions of dollars.
Yeah, because they're taking out grunt work that if you only do, if you only push data once ever, then you don't need DBT. But if you're going to be doing it regularly and you want to automate it, then it's an important piece in that puzzle.
Here's one thing to keep in mind with that, though. I found that with DBT, it was ideal for a scenario where I have one business unit that I'm doing daily transformations on. If I was a digital marketing agency and I had clients coming in and clients going out, I think DBT doesn't really scale up and scale down easily. And that's why I built that serverless way of doing all my transformations, because I could kind of pull my live clients on a daily basis. And based on how many clients I had, I could then do all the correct transformations. New client on day one, sweet. Expand out my client set, do the transform on the new client. I lose clients 4 and 5 on day 2, sweet. I am no longer transforming their data. That to me was a manual process, if I'm not mistaken. With
right. I mean, whether you realize it or not, you've brought us completely full circle. We started off near the top of talking about how there's multiple ways to do one thing.
Yeah,
but
100%.
Right there you illustrated. So then how do you choose? You look at each method and you figure out what the trade-offs are. And
exactly.
You did, right? And that's if I could leave one thing with people that are hearing you today, it would be that they understand when they start to get into this, they're going to be looked at to make some of those decisions, but not to be afraid. They're just trade-offs. It's not, it will work or it won't work. They will probably all work. They'll just work to either better or worse degrees, right?
Yeah.
Noah, if people want to find out more about, these sorts of things that you like or what you're up to these days, where would you send them?
Yeah. So I'm crazy active on Twitter, and my Twitter handle is Noah Lerner, NOAHLEARNER. I also run SEO rooms on a platform called Clubhouse, and my username on Clubhouse is The Kraken, KRAKEN. And on LinkedIn, I'm Noah Lerner, and I'm one of the nicest guys in marketing. Like, I network relentlessly, and I do that because I really like to help people. And I've helped, dozens of people find jobs, and I've helped people find key talent. And I'm not a headhunter. It's just I delight in meeting and helping people. So look me up on LinkedIn and connect if you'd like to get a Zoom sometime.
This is the very way in which Noah was introduced to me by someone, and I'll back up what you said. That's what you do. And there's no tricks up your sleeves. That's just the sort of way you roll. Noah, I'm really, really glad that you came on and explained this. Thank you again.
Yeah, 100%. It was really fun, Glenn. I hope your audience, I hope it's a good fit for your audience.
I think they've left appreciating, right, what all is entailed here. And you've definitely left them with at least one thing that they can do to, look at how they'll make their marketing even better.
Thanks for listening. Follow the show on Twitter @Funnel Reboot. If you like what you have heard today, please consider leaving a review wherever you get your podcasts.